Chapter 4 Chinese Politics in Understanding Contemporary China by Robert E. Gamer and Stanley W. Toombs. Presentation by Islino Spina. A Legacy of Unity and Economic Achievement. One of the most significant achievements of the Han was the adoption of Confucianism. Confucian traditions have a very strong influence on China's ability to maintain unity and prosperity. In Confucianism, the way of having a stable governance came from the proper performance of stable obligations. Citizens cannot expect to live in a stable country when they themselves fail to carry out their most basic social obligations within their families. Individuals who fail to carry out these mutual obligations disgrace themselves and those to whom they owe these obligations and destroy the foundations of the state. In Confucian philosophy, society is divided greater and lesser orders. Four customs have evolved that has also helped to keep the emperor and those with wealth in line, while still investing them with the power to rule and engage in business. Custom 1. The system of choosing emperors and their wives. This allowed the role of noble families to reduce who have dominated before the Qin dynasty. The sons of emperors married daughters of peasants and who were taken away from their families when they were very young. Custom 2. Eunuchs. This ensured loyalty and see that only an emperor had sexual access to his wives. Males working within the compound of the palace were recruited at young age from villages, removed from their families, and castrated. Custom 3. The system of choosing public officials and regulating commerce. This was organized by choosing the top officials through regular competitive examinations open to all boys by the emperor. The exams tested the candidates' ability to write Chinese characters and their knowledge of the Confucian classics. Custom 4. The fifth Confucian relationship Guanxi. New powers for officials were softened by Guanxi. In Confucian thinking, a man's most important relationships are as father and son, as husband as brother, as subject of the ruler, and with certain selected neighbors, with he chooses to have special long-term relationships. China has been through a long tradition of political and cultural unification with a government that encouraged and limited capitalist enterprise. This brought social order and bountiful agriculture. A century of turmoil. In 1839 ushered in a century of profound challenge to these Chinese traditions. Chinese efforts to regulate trade in opium were retaliated. British forces invaded China and forced the government to sign the treaty. Foreigners gained the right to establish settlements and businesses partially free from Chinese regulation. Their commerce was so hard for Chinese officials or local clan leaders to regulate. Sun Yat-sen, Guangzhou native who studied in Japan and Hawaii, founded the revived China Society in 1894. China fell under the control of regional warlords. The examination system was abolished and the old literati was no longer around to maintain the civil bureaucracy. 1919 Versailles Conference made things worse by awarding part of the Shandong Peninsula to Japan as a reward for its support of the Allies in World War I. This began the May 4th movement. In 1921, Sun met the representatives of Russia's new government, the Soviet Union, to procure help in reuniting China. This alliance dissolved after Sun's death in 1925. He left the leadership of the KMT to Chiang Kai-shek. He also planned to wipe out the remaining communist stronghold, but in 1934, these communists began their long march on foot to escape Chiang's forces. Japan then took over Manchuria and was threatening further hostilities. Chiang urged Jiang to wipe out Mao's new stronghold, but Jiang was convinced that the time had come for the KMT nationalists and the communists to make a truce to fight against the Japanese. 6 months later, Japan attacked China. The war was long and bloody. Japanese troops swept Beijing to Guangzhou. Life was horrendous in all three areas. They used people for slave labor in farms and factories and wiped out entire villages in their three alls: kill all, burn all, and destroy all campaigns. Warlords controlled much of the remaining territory. Peasants worked long hours while local people starved. Communists worked with landlords to reduce their rents. In 1942, Mao initiated the first of many rectification campaigns, forcing people to stand before their neighbors and admit their mistakes in an effort to enforce political solidarity. Fighting and recrimination among the three sides grew increasingly bloody. Unity nearly restored. In 1945, the end of World War II, was much of China's countryside had been ravaged by war, deforestation, erosion, floods, and exploitative landlords. Industries were dismantled and inflation was low. In 1949, Mao declared formation of the People's Republic of China. China was ready for restoration, but it required curbing inflation, restoring land to the peasants, rebuilding heavy industry, and creating a stable administrative structure. The next challenge was to root out opponents of the new regime and inspire the citizenry to set aside personal gain so as to restore the nation's vitality. In 1951, counter-revolutionary campaign forced people to stand before their neighbors and confess they had been disloyal to the new regime. Tens of thousands of them were executed. 1952, five anti-campaign was aimed at foreign and domestic capitalists engaged in tax evasion, bribery, theft of state property, fraud on government contracts, and theft of state economic information. The campaigns attacked foreign enemies and called for patriotism and determination to rout those holding back China's development. China had pulled itself together and left the war years behind, but it was facing a baffling dilemma. Communists had returned to the land to peasants, but were imposing rules that ran counter to the traditional culture. In 1957, Mao returned to the source of his power, the peasants and workers. Students at Beijing University started a democracy wall and filled it with posters denouncing a wide range of Communist Party policies and even the right of the communists to rule. People around the country joined in. Mao backed down and joined the inner circle, calling for crackdowns on the campaign and severe punishment of those making the criticisms. The anti-rightist rectification campaign led to 300,000 intellectuals losing their jobs without hope of finding other employment, and sending many of them into exile on farms. They will never forget this humiliation. 2 decades of turmoil. 1957 agricultural production moved to center stage as the primary concern of China's leaders. Industrial production had been growing far more rapidly than grain production, and the income of rural workers had outpaced that of peasants. The following year, the party announced a great leap forward. It opened much land for agricultural production and brought new industry and agricultural capabilities to formerly remote regions. A new era had begun. Within 4 years, Deng Xiaoping had overcome strong challenges from his rivals to take control of the party, and the U.S. extended diplomatic recognition to the People's Republic. Mao had paved the way for reforms in keeping with tradition by weakening the central bureaucracies, returning land to peasants, and helping even small communities develop consumer industries. Into the world economy. After Mao eras ended, China was free to pursue the added elements of economic strength that had eluded it before: foreign capital, technology, and markets. To implement reform, Deng called for modernizations of agriculture, industry, defense, and science and technology, and initiated new economic policies. The groups most harmed were students, intellectuals, urban youth still trapped in the countryside, central planners, and workers in state industries. Students were marching all over China to raise these concerns they had during 1989. After several weeks, the government responded with a bloody recapture of Tiananmen Square, arrests and long prison sentences, rectification campaign condemning the action, and requirements that students serve stints in the army to remind them of discipline. In 1992, Deng called for dramatic further expansion of economic liberalization. This set off a wave of construction. China had definitely come a long way. It had restored unity and set in motion dynamic economic growth. China has been through many challenges, but these challenges were about improving the quality of people's lives. In 2001, China was admitted into the World Organization. Today, Beijing sends large numbers of Han to Tibet and cities in the outer northern arc and the southwest in the belief that it is spreading modernization and civilization, but also to develop the vast natural resources in those regions. The fourth and fifth generations of leadership. Each year, meetings of the National People's Congress and the National Meeting of the People's Political Consultative Conference showcase diversity. China changes over time because of the new government policies and decisions that they were made resulting in massive new high-rise suburban housing, ownership for private cars and motorcycles, bullet trains, and blogging on cell phones have been a result. Jiang Zemin, the former leader of Shanghai, became the general secretary of the Standing Committee of the Politburo of the Communist Party. At the 17th Party Congress in 2007, Xi Jinping became a member of the Standing Committee. The fourth generation leadership had a more direct approach than the prior generation to confronting China's domestic problems. In 2007, the central government ended taxes on all peasants. Poor students received 3 frees: food, board, and transportation. Poor families received cash subsidies. The government established health insurance scheme available in most rural counties. The growth strengthened the wealth and power of local leaders. In 2011, the National People's Congress adopted the 12th Five-Year Plan, centered on the theme Inclusive Growth. In the 21st century, China's leaders are more open about the problems that the nation faces and are implementing policies directed at solving them. What will endure and what will change? Today's top businesses and political leaders have in fact descended from the same social orders that ruled imperial China. Members of the government bureaucracy are more comfortable with the old capitalism rather than the new. Today, both rapid economic growth and potential economic slumps threaten order and prosperity. Old governance and uncertain outcomes. The government has introduced policies to raise wages, lower prices, and give social support, but now peasants are upset and engage in many forms of protest because the government and local officials raising fees and taxes. Every year, millions of people participate in tens of thousands strikes, demonstrations, and riots to protest these problems. Several U.S. companies helped the Chinese government make an internet firewall to block and tap undesired political content and arrest individuals sending it. Examples are Sina Weibo, Tencent QQ, Youku, and Baidu. The fifth generation tries its hand. The 18th Party Congress in 2012 brought the fifth generation dramatically and colorfully to the forefront. Xi took direct action. He knew that conspicuous consumption, official corruption, environment pollution, declining water resources, and social instability would prevent China from sustaining the Chinese dream. She created small leading groups to direct policies. The 2016 Central Committee meeting declared Xi the core leader of the party. He hopes to solve that irony by demanding absolute loyalty to both himself, the liberal modern reformer, and the CCP. Thank you for listening to my presentation.